"Sir, this area is for hotel guests only." The words came out before the man even reached the front desk, before he touched the marble counter, before he said a single word. Beaumont Ashford stopped walking. He had taken exactly 11 steps through the revolving door of the Whitmore Grand. 11 steps across imported Italian tile, past the arrangement of white orchids that somebody changed every morning, past the fountain that guests photographed and posted and forgot, and a security guard had materialized from somewhere to his left like the man had been waiting for him specifically. Maybe he had been. "I'm sorry," Beaumont said. His voice was even. Controlled. The voice of a man who had learned, a long time ago, that the first thing they take from you is your composure, and that they cannot take it if you don't give it. The guard. His name tag read Pryor, chest puffed up like a man who had recently been given a uniform and mistaken it for authority, planted himself between Beaumont and the front desk with the particular confidence of someone who had never once been wrong in his own estimation. "This is a restricted lobby," Pryor said. "Guest access only. If you're here for deliveries, the service entrance is around the side on Clement Street." Beaumont looked at him, just looked at him. He was 53 years old. He was wearing a charcoal wool suit that had been tailored on Savile Row 14 years ago and still fit him as though it had been made that morning. He was carrying a leather briefcase that had belonged to his father, resoled once and still going. His shoes were clean. His face was clean. His hands, if Pryor had thought to notice them, were the hands of a man who had spent decades solving other people's most complicated problems. But Pryor had not noticed any of that. Pryor had seen what he always saw first, and he had made, in the span of about 2 seconds, a series of decisions he was going to regret for the rest of his career. "Clement Street," Beaumont said. "Yes, sir. Around the back. They'll sign you in." Around the corner of the lobby, a woman at the concierge desk had looked up. She was young, maybe 25, with the careful professional expression of someone who had learned to watch situations without appearing to. Her name was Taryn. She had worked at the Whitmore Grand for 3 years. She had seen this before. She did not move, not yet. "I want to be sure I understand," Beaumont said to Pryor, and his voice had not changed at all. "You're telling me the service entrance is on Clement Street." "That's correct, because you believe I'm here for deliveries." Something in Pryor's posture shifted. Not much, just enough. The first hairline fracture of doubt. He covered it quickly. "I'm just following protocol, sir. This lobby is for registered guests and what is it exactly about me that suggests I'm not a registered guest?" Silence. Pryor's mouth opened and then closed. A couple near the elevator bank had stopped pretending not to watch. The man in the couple touched his wife's arm. There's no suggestion of anything," Pryor said. "It's standard procedure to stop people at the door, to ensure that guests are." "You didn't stop the last 4 people who came through that door," Beaumont said. "I watched from outside 2 men in business casual, 1 woman with shopping bags, a teenager in a hoodie." He paused. "You waved all of them through." The lobby had gotten very quiet, not dramatically quiet, not movie quiet. Just the particular quiet of a public space when everyone in it privately understands that something is happening, and no one is entirely sure what to do about it. Pryor was not a bad man. That is worth saying plainly. He was not a man who woke up in the morning and thought of himself as someone who did harm. He thought of himself as diligent, professional, attentive to his surroundings. He would have told you, if you'd asked him, that he treated everyone the same. He would have believed it. That's the part that makes it complicated. "Sir," Pryor said, and his voice had gone careful now, like a man walking on ice he wasn't sure about. "I apologize if it seemed that way. I just noticed you coming in and I thought, what did you think?" No answer. "I'd like to check in," Beaumont said. "I have a reservation." He moved past Pryor, not roughly, not with any theatrical shoulder, just moved past him the way a man moves through a space that belongs to him and walked to the front desk. Behind him, Pryor stood still, trying to decide what his next move was, and finding, for the first time in a while, that he had no idea. The desk agent was a man named Fletcher. Mid-30s, pleasant face, the practiced warmth of someone trained to make every interaction feel personal even when it wasn't. Fletcher had also watched the exchange from the desk. When Beaumont arrived in front of him, Fletcher's expression was professionally neutral, but his eyes were slightly too attentive, waiting. "Reservation under Ashford," Beaumont said. Fletcher typed, looked at his screen, typed again. And then something happened to Fletcher's face. It was subtle, The kind of change that only happens when information arrives that doesn't match expectations. A small recalibration behind the eyes. His posture changed by maybe 2 degrees. "Mr. Ashford," Fletcher said, and his voice had shifted registers entirely. Not obsequious, not dramatic, just suddenly and genuinely attentive in a way it hadn't been 4 seconds ago. "Yes, sir, you're in the Whitmore suite, 14th floor." He reached below the desk. "I have your key cards ready. I also have a message from Mr. Gaines. He said to let you know the board pre-dinner is confirmed for 7. Behind Beaumont, the couple near the elevator bank exchanged a glance. Taryn at the concierge desk had stood up, slowly, without meaning to. Pryor had not moved. "Thank you," Beaumont said, and took the key cards from Fletcher's hand, and that was all. No speech. No turning around to make a point. No moment of lingering triumph. He picked up his father's briefcase, and he walked toward the elevator, and he pressed the call button, and he waited. The doors opened. He stepped in. The last thing Pryor saw before the elevator doors closed was Beaumont Ashford's back in that charcoal wool suit. Standing straight, not looking at anyone, going where he had always been going. The doors shut, and the lobby breathed again. What nobody in that lobby knew, what Pryor certainly didn't know, was what it had taken Beaumont Ashford to walk through those doors without saying more than he said. He had been doing this for 31 years. 31 years of walking into rooms and being handed the service entrance. 31 years of cabs that didn't stop, and conference rooms that went quiet, and handshakes offered a half-second too late. 31 years of being, in the eyes of men like Pryor, a question mark in a space full of people who were assumed to be answers. He had grown up in Meridian, Mississippi, in a house with a screen door that didn't close all the way, and a father who could fix any engine built before 1975. His mother taught 4th grade for 37 years. Neither of them had gone to college. Both of them had worked continuously and without complaint, in the way people work when they know that stopping is not an option. He had gone to Howard on a merit scholarship, then to Yale Law on another. He had spent 4 years at a firm in Atlanta where he was the only black partner candidate in his class, where he had done 3 times the work for 2/3 of the recognition, and where he had eventually understood that certain rooms were never going to open for him from the inside. So he had stopped waiting for doors to open. He had bought the building. That was not a metaphor. Beaumont Ashford was, at 53, the managing partner of Ashford Capital Meridian, a private equity and legal advisory firm with offices in Atlanta, Chicago, Houston, and, as of 8 months ago, Washington, D.C. He had structured more acquisition deals than he could remember and managed client portfolios in excess of 9 figures. He was not famous. He did not want to be famous. He wanted to do good work and go home. He was in Harwick, Georgia, a mid-sized city that liked to call itself a town that remembers its roots, because one of those clients had a problem. A hotel chain with 7 properties across the southeast, a merger that had stalled, a board that was fighting itself and bleeding money while it argued. Beaumont had been called in to mediate, restructure, and, if necessary, save a deal that a lot of people had already written off. The pre-dinner tonight was the opening move. He had 12 hours to understand the board before he sat down with all of them tomorrow morning. He had not expected to spend any of those 12 hours dealing with a security guard in the lobby, but he had, because he always did, somewhere. The details changed, the airport, the restaurant, the hotel lobby, the parking garage, but the architecture of the moment was always the same. Someone looked at him and decided in 2 seconds what he was and what he wasn't. And he had to choose, again, whether to burn energy correcting them or save it for the room he was actually there to be in. He was getting better at saving it. He was not all the way there yet. In the elevator alone, Beaumont put one hand against the wall, just for a moment, just to feel something solid. He closed his eyes and breathed once, the way his mother had taught him. In through the nose, count 4, out through the mouth. And then he opened them again, and he looked at his own reflection in the polished elevator doors, and he said nothing, and the doors opened on the 14th floor. The Whitmore suite was the kind of room that reminded you that money, at its most basic level, is just the freedom to not think about certain things. The windows ran floor to ceiling along the west wall. The light at this hour was long and amber and lay across the hardwood floor in slanted bars. There was a writing desk near the window, solid and dark, and Beaumont put his father's briefcase on it and sat down and pulled out the files he had been building for 6 weeks. The Whitmore Grand was one of the 7 properties in the portfolio. Property number 3, actually. Mid-tier in revenue, but positioned in a city that was growing faster than the board had anticipated. If the merger went through correctly, this property alone would appreciate by a margin that would make the whole deal look like a bargain. He had 40 minutes before he needed to go downstairs. He read. He was good at reading. He was good at finding the detail that didn't match, the number that had been rounded in a direction that served someone, the clause in an agreement that did what it said only if you agreed to read it with a very particular interpretation. These were skills he had developed in rooms where he had learned early that the margin for error was smaller for him than for the men sitting next to him. You learn to be precise when imprecision has a higher cost. At 6:40, he closed the folders. He changed his shirt. He went downstairs. The restaurant adjoined the lobby on the east side. Private dining room, back left corner, the kind of arrangement that hotels maintain for exactly these occasions. Dark wood paneling, heavy chairs, a table that seated 10, but tonight was set for 7. 6 members of the Whitmore board and Beaumont. He arrived at 6:58. 3 board members were already seated. A woman in her 60s with the alert, careful energy of someone who had survived a lot of board meetings. Her name was Rosalind Faber, and she was the one who had called him. A younger man, maybe 40, who had the specific restlessness of someone who felt the meeting was going to go his way and couldn't wait for it to start. Beaumont had seen his name in the files, Chet Harding, and an older man at the far end of the table, white-haired, with the settled stillness of someone who had stopped needing to prove anything. That was Emmett Gaines, 40 years in hospitality. His signature was on the original property acquisition documents. They looked up when Beaumont came in. Rosalind stood and extended her hand. "Mr. Ashford, thank you for coming down." "Thank you for the invitation," Beaumont said. Harding did not stand. He looked at Beaumont with a particular kind of measuring look, the kind that is trying to decide whether to take something seriously. He had the manner of a man who had researched Beaumont that afternoon and found the results insufficient. Gaines nodded from his seat, a small nod, but it was the nod of someone who had done his research earlier and had drawn a different conclusion. The other 3 board members filtered in over the next few minutes. Maureen Doyle, the chief financial officer of the acquiring company, sharp, efficient, here to close. A man named Pettigrew, who controlled 3 of the 7 votes and who spoke very little. And a local attorney named Sloan, not Craig Sloan from the list of names that didn't apply here, but a different Sloan entirely, a woman named Bet, who represented the minority stakeholders and who looked, upon meeting Beaumont, like someone who had been told he would be smaller. They sat. The first 15 minutes were the minutes that always exist before the real meeting starts. Wine was poured. Pleasantries landed and bounced. Someone mentioned the traffic on 441. Someone else mentioned the renovation to the East Wing. Beaumont listened to all of it. This was data too. You could learn a lot from what people chose to talk about when they didn't think the meeting had started yet. Harding, he noted, talked about his flight, twice, and mentioned his firm by name in a context that did not require it. He was establishing something, reminding the table of his credentials. The people who did that, Beaumont had found, were usually the people most afraid that the table had forgotten. Gaines said almost nothing, just ate his bread and watched. Rosalind asked Beaumont a question about his work in Atlanta that was direct and substantive and showed she had read his background carefully. Then the entrees came and the real meeting started. Harding opened it. "I'll be honest," Harding said, with the tone of a man who believed that announcing honesty was the same as practicing it. "I'm not sure we need a mediator. I think this deal has a clear path, and I think the people in this room who are complicating it are doing so for reasons that have more to do with personal interest than actual business logic." He didn't look at anyone specific when he said it. He didn't have to. Pettigrew set down his fork. Bet Sloan's expression did not change. "That's one perspective," Rosalind said, with the neutrality of a woman who had heard this version before and had decided for now not to argue with it in front of the mediator. "It's the accurate perspective," Harding said. Beaumont set down his own fork, quietly. He reached for his water glass, took a drink, set it down. He let 2 full seconds pass. This was deliberate. He had learned that 2 seconds of silence in a room like this did more than any interruption. Then he said, "Tell me what you think the path is." Harding blinked. He had been expecting pushback, agreement or disagreement, either one. Not a question. The acquisition goes through at the offered valuation, Harding said. The minority stakeholders take a reasonable return and step back. We restructure management across all 7 properties on a unified model. Operational efficiency goes up, redundancies come down, and 18 months from now, everybody's position looks better than it does today. Everybody's, Beaumont said. Everybody who's still in the room. The sentence sat there. Beaumont looked at Harding for a moment without expression. Then he looked at Pettigrew, then at Bet Sloan. What does reasonable return mean? He asked. In your model, Harding told him. He gave a number that was, Beaumont knew from 6 weeks of file reading, 14% below what the minority stake was actually worth at current market valuation. Not dramatically below. Just enough below that it would feel like a negotiating position rather than an insult, the kind of number that had been chosen carefully to be technically defensible. Interesting, Beaumont said. It's fair, Harding said. I didn't say it wasn't, Beaumont said. Another small silence. Gaines was watching Beaumont now with the particular attention of someone who has realized in the middle of an evening that the most interesting person at the table is not who they expected. The dinner continued. Plates were cleared. A second bottle of wine appeared. Conversations split and reconverged. Beaumont moved through all of it carefully, asking questions rather than making statements, building a picture in his head that was more detailed than anything in the files. Files showed you the structure. Rooms like this showed you the load-bearing walls, where the pressure was, where the cracks were, what was holding and what wasn't. By the time the dessert course arrived, he had a very clear sense of what was actually happening. It was not what Harding thought was happening. At 10:15, the dinner concluded. Board members said their polite goodnights and dispersed. Rosalind lingered for a moment to tell Beaumont that tomorrow's meeting started at 9, and that she was glad he was here. She said it quietly. The way people say things they mean. Harding, on his way out, stopped beside Beaumont's chair. He looked down at him. Not with hostility, exactly. With the particular assessment of a man who was revising a calculation. You're going to tell them they're worth more than I offered, Harding said. I'm going to tell everyone in the room what the numbers say, Beaumont said. That's what I was hired to do. Harding held his gaze for a moment. Then he nodded once and walked out. Gaines was the last one at the table. He had barely moved through the whole dinner, this old man with the white hair and the 40 years of hospitality in his hands. When the others were gone, he looked across the table at Beaumont. Where are you from originally? Gaines said. Mississippi, Beaumont said. Gaines nodded. My grandmother was from Meridian, he said. Never got north of it her whole life. Beaumont looked at him. Mine either, he said, something in that landed between them. Not a moment, not a movie scene, just a thread connecting 2 points. Gaines pushed back his chair slowly, the way old men do when they've been sitting for a while. You know what I think the problem is? He said. Not with the deal, with all of it. He didn't wait for an answer. People look at something and decide what it's worth before they look at what it actually is. He picked up his water glass, looked at it, set it down. Usually cost them more than whatever they saved by deciding fast. He wished Beaumont good night and walked out. Beaumont sat alone at the table for a little while. The room was quiet. The candles were still going. Someone in the kitchen was running water. He took the long way back to the elevator, through the side corridor past the lobby bar. Not for any specific reason. He was thinking, and when he thought best, he moved. The lobby at this hour was mostly empty. A couple at the far end of the bar leaning toward each other. A young man at the desk who wasn't Fletcher, who didn't look up, and Pryor. Pryor was still there, near the service corridor entrance. End of a long shift, probably. He saw Beaumont at the same moment Beaumont saw him. For a beat, just a beat, neither of them moved. Pryor looked away first. Beaumont kept walking, past the bar, past the orchids, past the fountain that guests photographed and forgot. He pressed the elevator call button, and while he waited, he did not look back at the lobby, and he did not think about Pryor's expression in the moment Pryor recognized him, and understood all at once what he had done. Some lessons Beaumont had learned, you cannot teach. You can only create the conditions in which they arrive on their own. The elevator came. He got in. Upstairs in the suite, he called his mother. She was 79 and still sharp and still teaching, a reading group. Now at the public library 3 mornings a week. She answered on the second ring, the way she always did, like she had been waiting. How's the hotel? She said. Nice, he said. Big windows. You eating right? I had a whole dinner. That's not what I asked. He told her about the dinner. Not all of it. The parts that were interesting. The parts that would make her laugh. The old man from Meridian's grandmother. She said, in the way she said things when she was thinking. You okay? She said. Just that. Just those two words in the quiet way she had when she was asking the actual question. He thought about the lobby. 11 steps, the service entrance on Clement Street. His hand against the elevator wall, the count to 4. Getting there, he said. She accepted that the way she accepted most things. Sleep, she said. You have to be sharp tomorrow. I know. Beaumont. Yes, ma'am. You were always the sharpest person in every room you ever walked into, she said. Don't let anybody talk you out of that. She said goodnight and hung up first, the way she always did. He sat on the edge of the bed with the phone in his hand for a while. The windows at this hour showed nothing but the lights of Harwick and the dark above them, and he looked at that. The lights and the dark, for longer than he needed to. Tomorrow at 9 o'clock, he was going to walk into a room and change the shape of a deal that a lot of very confident people had already decided was finished. He was going to do it quietly and precisely, and without a single wasted word. He was going to do what he always did. He set the phone on the nightstand. He opened his father's briefcase one more time, took out the top folder, read for 20 minutes, closed it, turned out the light. And in the dark of the Whitmore Grand, on the 14th floor, in the city his grandmother had never gotten north of, Beaumont Ashford lay still and breathed and let the room hold him, and did not think about service entrances at all.